Good morning, everyone. So today we are going to see chemistry of proteins. Most of the things are already covered. So first of all, as you had seen all these things, we will go a little bit faster. So the nutrients are broadly divided into macronutrients and micronutrients. And in macronutrients include the carbohydrates, fats and proteins. So in that, we are going to see proteins. So proteins are most abundant biological molecules. They occur in variety of sizes ranging from small peptide to huge polymers. We know small peptides which contain some 3 to 10 amino acids, and huge polymers means they are a combination of different polypeptide chains. So they vary from peptides to polymers. So coming to the properties of proteins, we know the carbohydrates having different properties. We are using the properties of carbohydrates for identifying the carbohydrates. Similarly, lipids are having different properties. And coming to the properties of proteins, the first property is precipitation reaction. So proteins are precipitated by adding different precipitating agents. So we had done all this in the practical session. So precipitation by organic solvents, precipitation by metal ions, and alkaloidal reagents. So by adding this, the protein will get precipitated. The stability of the protein depends on charge and shell of hydration. So when the protein loses its stability, then it gets precipitated. Precipitation means deposition to the bottom, that is precipitation. And this happens when the protein loses its stability. And the stability of the protein depends upon the charge and shell of hydration. So what is this charge? So all the protein molecules exist with some charge. Neutral proteins rarely exist. So most of the proteins will be having some charge. So depending on the charge and the shell of hydration. So this is the shell of hydration. We know water is a polar molecule. It contains a little charge. So depending upon this charge of the protein molecule and the charge on the water molecules, they form shell of hydration. And depending upon the charge on the protein and this shell of hydration, the precipitation depends. Okay. So when there is a change in the, by adding any agent, if there is change in the charge of the protein, or if there is any breakage of the shell of hydration, that leads to the precipitation of the protein. So this precipitation is the important property of the protein by which we can identify the proteins. So the other property is salting out. So when a neutral salt is added, salting out is also nothing but it's a precipitation. But when the precipitation takes place, when a neutral salt is added, by addition of the neutral salt, then there is removal of the shell of hydration, then the protein will get precipitated. This is known as salting out. So ammonium sulfate and sodium sulfate are the neutral salts. We had practically seen this salting out in the experiments also. So this is the salting out. When a neutral salt is added, the protein will get precipitated. Depending upon the salt added, the protein will get precipitated. And the next important property is isoelectric pH. This is very important property for isolation and separation of the proteins. Okay. Proteins are least soluble at a particular pH. That pH is known as isoelectric pH. So when isoelectric pH is adjusted by adding some acid or base, then that particular protein will get precipitated. So that is known as isoelectric pH, which is an important property of the proteins. So the example is casein, which get precipitated at 4.6 pH. So in a mixture of solution which contains mixture of proteins, if we want to separate casein, or if we want to isolate, or if we want to identify the casein, whether casein is present in that or not, what we can do is we can adjust the pH to 4.6. If suppose casein protein is present in that mixture, the casein will get precipitated at 4.6 pH. So in this way we can identify different proteins by adjusting the isoelectric pH. So that's why this property of protein is very important. Okay. Next is the colloidal osmotic pressure. So this is also a very important property. We had seen this while discussing the cases in edema. In edema, we had seen the difference between due to imbalance between the hydrostatic pressure and osmotic pressure, which leads to edema, accumulation of fluid. So that we had seen there. So here we can see this colloidal osmotic pressure or oncotic pressure is exerted by the albumin only, which is nothing but a protein. See here you can see this is the hydrostatic pressure and this is the osmotic pressure. So there will be balance between these two pressures, and this osmotic pressure is exerted by the albumin only, which is nothing but a protein. So when there is any decreased albumin, there will be imbalance which leads to edema. That all we had seen in the cases. And next, coming to the functions of protein. So we had seen the properties of protein. Coming to the functions of proteins. So we know the functions of carbohydrates. The main function is energy. Apart from that, it is having the other functions. And coming to lipids, storage is the main function of lipid. Apart from that, it participates in the energy production and also the structural component. And coming to the functions of proteins, there are number of functions to the proteins. Okay, so we'll see some of the functions. The first and important function of the protein is it gives structure and strength. So they are part of outer membrane of the cells. We know cell contains proteins. The cell membrane contains different proteins, and they are abundant. These proteins are abundant in muscles, organs, and tissues also. Okay. So we know protein is the important structural compound in cell wall, in cell membrane. And the other function is providing the energy. We know the first source of energy is carbohydrates. So apart from carbohydrates, the proteins will supply the energy to some extent. And we know enzymes. Enzymes are nothing but they will increase the rate of reaction in the body. And we know the examples. There are many examples for the enzymes. And all the enzymes are nothing but the proteins. So how the enzymes are synthesized is also nothing but by transcription and translation only, just how the proteins are produced. So enzymes are nothing but proteins. So all the functions of enzymes are indirectly nothing but the functions of the proteins. Hormones. All the hormones, almost many of the hormones are proteins. And we know the endocrine actions of different hormones. And insulin and secretin, many examples are there for hormones. All hormones are nothing but proteins. And immunoglobulins. So what are immunoglobulins? So immunoglobulins form antibodies which fight against the infection and the antigens. So these antibodies which are formed from immunoglobulins are nothing but they are proteins. Clotting factors. So for blood clotting, different clotting factors are required. All these clotting factors are nothing but they are proteins. And muscle contraction proteins like actin, myosin are also proteins. And genetic proteins are like histone proteins are also nothing but proteins which are helpful in binding of the DNA. Okay, these are helpful in genetic control and transport and storage. So hemoglobin and ferritin help in transport and storage. These are also nothing but they are proteins. So we know hemoglobin, it helps in the transport of oxygen. Each hemoglobin molecule combines with the 4 oxygen atoms and help in the transport of the oxygen. So that's why hemoglobin is a protein which helps in the transport. Similarly, ferritin. We know ferritin is also a protein which helps in the storage of iron. So without iron, ferritin is known as apoferritin, and with iron it is known as holoferritin. So the function of the ferritin is nothing but storage of the iron. So these are the functions of the important functions of the proteins. Next is the amino acid. So amino acid is nothing but the basic unit of protein, and it contains 2 functional groups, amino and carboxyl groups. The amino group NH2, which is basic in nature, and carboxyl COOH, which is acidic in nature. That's why protein will be having both basic and acidic nature. It will be having both positive and negative charge. Okay, because it contains two functional groups. And there are 300 amino acids in nature, and 20 amino acids are present in the humans, which are necessary for the synthesis of different proteins. So this is the general structure of amino acid, which contains an amino group and a carboxyl group and a side chain. Side chain can vary, but it contains an amino group and a carboxyl group. So these are the different amino acids. You know all this, and these are the different amino acids. All the 20 amino acids present in the humans. Okay. And most of the proteins in our body are made up of L-alpha amino acids. The L form of amino acids or participates in the synthesis of many proteins in the body. So general properties of amino acids. So we had seen the properties of proteins by which we can identify the proteins. Similarly, we are going to see the general properties of amino acids. So solubility, they are generally soluble in water, and melting point is a little bit high for the amino acids. And taste, different amino acids are having different tastes. And optical property, almost all the amino acids possess the optical property, the optical isomerism, except glycine, because glycine will be having less number of only 3 carbon atoms. Okay? So remaining all amino acids will be having the D and L forms. So amino acids are ampholytes. This is very important property. They can exist in acidic and basic nature. They can exist in positive and negative charge they contain, and they can donate and accept electron. Hence, they are known as ampholytes. So amino acids rarely exist in neutral form. They will be having some positive or negative charge. Okay. In acidic medium, they will be having positive charge and they exist as cations. And in basic medium or in alkaline medium, they exist as negative charge, that is anions. And each amino acid will be having a characteristic pH. At this pH, they will be having both positive and negative charge. So that molecule is known as deuterion. And that particular pH, the characteristic pH is known as isoelectric pH. Okay, isoelectric pH. Isoelectric pH, it is defined as a pH at which a molecule exists as deuterion or dipolar ion and carries no net charge. The molecule is electrically neutral. So this is a pH at which an amino acid will be having both negative and positive charge, but the net charge is neutral. So that's why it is electrically neutral. So the isoelectric pH is a characteristic is specific for different amino acids. So it exists as deuterion or dipolar ion. It is nothing but a hybrid molecule which contains both positive and negative charge. Positive and negative charge on the same molecule is known as deuterion or dipolar ion, and the net charge is negative. Okay, the charge is not neutral. The net charge is neutral on the deuterion, and this deuterion exists at isoelectric pH, which is specific for different amino acids. So this is a calculation for isoelectric pH, and the example is leucine. The isoelectric pH of leucine is 6. And this is a titration curve for amino acid. So initially at low pH, the amino acid exists as positive charge at low pH. Okay, when NaOH, the alkali, is being added, then slowly the pH will pH will be increasing, and the amino acid exists as deuterion. And still, if the pH increases, that is alkaline medium, the amino acid exists with negative charge. Okay, initially at low pH in acidic medium, it exists as positive charged ion. And when the alkali is added, it keeps on increasing, the pH will be increasing, and the alkalinity will be increasing. And at some point, the pH, it contains both positive and negative charge. That pH is known as isoelectric pH. and the molecule is known as deuterion. Okay, here it contains both positive and negative charge. If still the alkali is added, the medium becomes alkaline medium. The pH will be increasing, and the amino acid will existing as negative charged ion. Okay, so this is titration curve of amino acid. Coming to the classification of amino acids, the classification is, it is classified depending upon different ways. So when classification is given, you have to write all the ways, not only one way. Okay, based on different parameters, the amino acids are classified. So based on structure, polarity, nutritive value, and metabolic fate. And based on structure, the amino acid with aliphatic side chain, that is straight chain. The examples are leucine and isoleucine. And the amino acids containing hydroxyl group, the examples are serine, threonine, and tyrosine. And sulfur containing amino acids like cysteine and methionine. And acidic amino acids like aspartate and glutamate. And basic amino acids like histidine, lysine, arginine. And aromatic amino acids like phenylalanine, tyrosine, and tryptophan. And amino acids like proline. So all these depending upon the structure of the amino acid. This is the classification depending upon the structure of the amino acid. And classification based on polarity. Non-polar, polar with neutral R neutral side chain, that is R chain, with positive side chain, with negative side chain. So here there is no charge on the side chain, no charge on the amino acid itself, and alanine or leucine are the examples. And polar amino acids with neutral side chain, serine and threonine, with positive side chain are lysine, arginine, histidine, and with negative side chain is aspartate and glutamate. So that's why aspartate and glutamate are having basic properties, acidic properties, and these will be having basic properties because of positive charge. Aspartate and glutamate will be having acidic properties. And based on nutritive value, essential, non-essential, and semi-essential. We know essential, non-essential, depending upon the requirement, depending upon the synthesis, whether it is inside in the body or not, they are classified into essential, non-essential, and semi-essential. Okay, and examples we have to remember. And based on metabolic fate, how these amino acids are utilized for synthesis of different nutrients. Depending upon that, they are divided into glucogenic, ketogenic, and gluco and ketogenic amino acids. Glucogenic means they are useful in synthesis of carbohydrates. Ketogenic means they are useful in the synthesis of lipids. So these are the examples. You can remember the ketogenic are leucine and lysine, and you can remember both keto and glucogenic are threonine, phenylalanine, tryptophan, and tyrosine, and remaining all are the glucogenic amino acids. So this is a broad view of classification of amino acids depending upon the structure, polarity, nutritional value, and metabolic fate. Coming to the chemical properties, the chemical properties of amino acid depend on different groups present on the amino acid. One is carboxyl group. We know all the amino acids contain carboxyl group and amino group. So some chemical properties depend upon the carboxyl group. These are decarboxylation, reaction with ammonia, and formation of salts and esters. And some chemical properties depend upon the amino group. The reaction with hydrogen, deamination, transamination, color reaction. All these depend upon the amino group of the amino acid. And reactions of side chain. And some chemical properties depend upon the side chain which is present on the amino acids. The chemical properties varies. So coming to the carboxyl group, decarboxylation is nothing but removal of the carbon dioxide from the amino acids. These are the examples in which histidine is converted to histamine, and tyrosine is converted to tyramine, and tryptophan is converted to tryptamine by the removal of the carbon dioxide. Okay, this is decarboxylation reaction by which new compounds are formed. So this decarboxylation depends upon the carboxyl. And the next is reaction with ammonia, in which amides are formed, and formation of salts and esters. All these depend upon the carboxyl group of the amino acid. And coming to the amino group of the amino acid, deamination, that is removal of the amine group, by which a new keto acid is formed. So here you can see, you had already seen this deamination and transamination, all these things. In deamination, amino group is removed and a new keto acid and ammonia is formed. And in transamination, the amino group is transferred from one amino acid to another keto acid, by which new amino acid is formed and new keto acid is formed. And we know the biological importance of this deamination and transamination. They are used for interconversion of the amino acids and the synthesis of non-essential amino acids. Non-essential amino acids are synthesized within the body. That's why they are not needed to essentially supply in the diet. So for this, transamination, deamination are required, and these reactions take place with the help of amino group of the amino acid. Okay. You know the transamination reactions in which one amino acid is converted to another amino acid, and the keto acid is converted to the another keto acid. And this OH group, amide group, SH group, all these are present, which are present on the side chains, will participate in different reactions like formation of phosphoprotein and formation of glycosidic linkages and formation of disulfide bonds. So all this depends upon the side chains. Okay. So these are the chemical properties of amino acid which depend upon the carboxyl group, amino group, and side chain. So we had seen the classification of amino acids. Coming to the classification of proteins, this is also depending upon different parameters. They are classified in different ways. So depending upon the composition and solubility, the proteins are classified into simple, conjugated, and derived. So the simple are again divided into globular and fibrous, and globular includes albumin, globulins, protamines, prolamins, and glutamins. So all these examples you have to remember. Commonly the albumin, serum albumin, and lactalbumin, and globulins, egg globulin. Okay, and protamines, sperm proteins, and prolamins, gene and gliadin, and glutalin, and orazanine. All are important. And fibrous proteins. In simpler proteins also include fibrous proteins, which include collagen, elastin, fibrillin, and keratin. Okay. All this we had seen in the components of extracellular matrix. Conjugated proteins. So these are the proteins which are combined with the non-protein part of prosthetic group. Okay. These include glycoproteins, lipoproteins, nucleoproteins, phosphoproteins, metalloproteins, and chromoproteins. And you have to remember the examples. And derived proteins are degradative or denatured product of the main native protein. Okay. This includes progressive hydrolysis of the native protein. So it includes primary and secondary derived, and you have to remember the examples. The primary derived are the fibrin, metaprotein, and coagulum, and secondary proteins are proteases, peptones, and peptides. In reactions of peptones, we had seen the reactions in which we can confirm it as a secondary derived protein. And classification based on functions, functional classification. It includes structural proteins, catalytic proteins, contractile, hormonal, transport, defense, and genetic proteins. So structural proteins means many of the proteins are structural proteins only. Catalytic proteins means enzymes. All enzymes are catalytic proteins. Contractile proteins are myosin and actin. Hormonal proteins, all hormones are hormonal proteins. Transport proteins, we know hemoglobin is transport protein. Defense protein, we know all the immunoglobulins are defense proteins. And genetic proteins, histones are the genetic proteins. So this is a classification based on the function of the proteins. And classification based on nutritive value. So it is complete, partially complete, and incomplete. Okay, it includes albumin, cereal proteins, and gene and gelatin. Biologically important peptides. We know what are peptides, which contains less number of amino acids are known as peptides. And biologically important peptides are very important. So these are the examples: thyrotropin releasing hormone, glutathione, oxytocin, vasopressin, and angiotensin. So we know thyrotropin, it's a tripeptide which contains 3 amino acids. It is secreted by hypothalamus, and we know it controls, it stimulates this thyroid stimulating hormone for production of T3 and T4. Okay, it removes it stimulates the production of thyroid stimulating hormone from anterior pituitary, which regulates the production of T3 and T4. So next is glutathione. It is a tripeptide which contains 3 amino acids, that is glutamine, cysteine and glycine. And this glutathione is having a many functions. That's why this is very important peptide. Okay, it maintains RBC integrity. It involved in Meissner cycle, that is transport of amino acids in the intestine, Meissner cycle, and it is involved in detoxification process. Glutathione. So it is an important biological peptide. So coming to oxytocin, it contains 9 amino acids. It's a nanopeptide. It is also secreted by posterior pituitary and it helps in contraction of uterus. Vasopressin also nanopeptide, 9 amino acids produced from pituitary, and it helps in maintaining the blood pressure by retaining the water in the kidneys. And the angiotensin 1 is a decapeptide which contains 10 amino acids and it regulates the blood pressure. It is having hypertensive effect. So all these are biologically important peptides which contains less than 10 amino acids, but these are very useful in the different biological functions in the body. So that's why they are important. Coming to the structure of protein, proteins are made up of amino acids and they are made up of unique sequence of amino acids which is determined by genes contained in DNA. So we know proteins contain polypeptide chain and these polypeptide chains are synthesized from amino acids, and the addition of amino acids takes place in the cytoplasm, and this depends upon the mRNA, and this mRNA is transcribed from the DNA, a part of DNA, that is gene. So that's why the unique sequence depend upon the gene contained in DNA. So for understanding purpose, the structure of protein is divided into different levels: the primary, secondary, tertiary and quaternary. The primary structure denotes the sequence of amino acids in the chain. The secondary structure denotes steric relationship. The tertiary structure indicates 3D structure or domains, and quaternary structure, it indicates different subunits. That is, 2 or more polypeptide chains are present in the quaternary structure. So coming to the primary structure, the primary structure denotes number and linear sequence of amino acids. You have to remember only the linear sequence of amino acids. The addition of amino acids in a sequence indicates is denoted by primary structure. And we know this primary structure is decided by the gene present on the DNA by transcription and translation. Okay, so how the codons are present on the DNA, the gene, and how the codons are transferred to the mRNA. Depending upon that, the amino acid will be added, and finally the protein will be formed. Okay, and the important thing that we have to remember in the primary structure is peptide bond. The primary structure is completely stabilized by the peptide bond. So here you can see different amino acids, and the bond between each amino acid is peptide bond. Peptide bond is a very strong bond, and it stabilizes the primary structure. So in primary structure, we will focus more on the peptide bond. So peptide bond, which is formed between 2 molecules of amino acids releasing water. Okay, this is a very strong covalent bond. So here you can see this is one amino acid, this is another amino acid. OH from one amino acid and H from the other amino acid are removed in the form of water, and peptide bond is formed. Okay, so this peptide bond is present between the amino acids which stabilize the primary structure of the protein. So they are strong covalent bonds. So in primary structure, we focus more on the peptide bond. This is a partial double bond. It is trans in nature, no freedom of rotation. The distance is 1.32 angstrom, and the side chains are free to rotate on either side. The bond between this trans bond, there is no freedom of rotation between the C and N, but the side chains can freely rotate, and the angles of rotation are known as Ramachandran angles. Okay, and here you can see the linear sequence is nothing but it is primary structure, and this is the amino terminal and this is carboxyl terminal, and the bond between each amino acid is peptide bond. Coming to the importance of peptide bond, the important thing is protein functions. Most of the protein functions depend on the peptide bond, the primary structure. Linear sequence, the primary structure, the function of the protein depends upon the primary structure. What is the linear sequence? And most of the physical and chemical properties of the proteins also depend on the primary structure. And one more clinical aspect, the important thing is the generical diseases also depend on the primary structure only, the sequence of amino acids. Okay. So we had seen the sickle cell anemia, the linear sequence, the glutamate is replaced by valine, which leads to abnormal hemoglobin, that is sickle hemoglobin. Okay, so this is the example which shows that the primary structure is important in assessing the diseases, genetic diseases. So coming to the secondary structure, it denotes the configurational or steric relationship, okay, which are 3 to 4 amino acids apart in the linear sequence, and it denotes spatial arrangement of amino acids. So secondary structure contains alpha helix and beta pleated. These two are important, and apart from that, triple helix and supersecondary are also present. And Pauling and Corey described this alpha helix and beta pleated sheet. So this is the alpha helix. So it is most common and stable conformation. The alpha helix is spiral in structure. It is tightly packed coil structure, okay, with polypeptide bonds forming the backbone. And each turn is made up of 3.6 residues. That means each turn is made up of averagely 3.6 residues of amino acids. And the distance between the adjacent amino acids is 1.5 angstroms. This is about the structure, the secondary structure, the alpha helix. And alpha helix is right-handed, and it is stabilized by hydrogen bond. Okay. And alpha helix is abundant in hemoglobin and myoglobin. It is absent in chymotrypsin and proline. There will be disrupt alpha helix. Okay, amino acids like proline disrupt the alpha helix. You have to remember it is abundant in hemoglobin and myoglobin. It is absent in chymotrypsin. This is important. Okay. And one more important thing here is the hydrogen bond is present between the NH and CO group of the same amino acid, same polypeptide chain. So here you can see the hydrogen bond. The hydrogen bond is present with the CO of one amino acid and the NH of the another amino acid. But the CO and NO are, these two amino acids are a little bit apart from each other, but they belong to the same polypeptide chain. So here the hydrogen bond, which is formed between CO and NH of different amino acids, are present on the same polypeptide chain. That is the importance of hydrogen bond in the alpha helix. Okay. And coming to the beta pleated, this is the beta pleated. And here the polypeptide chain in beta plate is almost fully extended, and the distance between the amino acids is 3.5 angstroms. So here the stabilized by hydrogen bond between the neighboring polypeptide chains. So here you can see the hydrogen bonds are formed between different amino acids, the CO group of one amino acid and the NH group of the another amino acid. But these two amino acids are present in two different polypeptide chains in this model, in this beta pleated sheet model. But in alpha helix, they are present in the same polypeptide chain. Okay, that is important. And example you have to remember, the beta pleated sheets can run parallel or anti-parallel. The silk fibroin is anti-parallel and flavodoxin is parallel, and in carbonic anhydrase both parallel and anti-parallel beta pleated sheets are present. That means this structure is present. Some proteins contain primary, some contains primary, secondary and tertiary. Some contains primary and secondary alpha, some contains primary and secondary beta. Some may contain primary, secondary and tertiary quaternary. So depending upon the proteins, the different structure levels can be present. Okay, that you have to understand. And in the secondary, the main are the alpha helix and beta pleated. And apart from that, there are some super secondary structures like beta, alpha, beta, Greek key, beta meander and beta barrel. All these are super secondary structures, which are not common. And the bond stabilizing the secondary structure. The bond stabilizing the primary structure is peptide bonds. And the bond stabilizing the secondary structure are hydrogen bonds, hydrophobic bonds, van der Waals forces, and electrostatic bonds. All these bonds stabilize the secondary structure. So hydrogen bonds are nothing. We know the hydrogen bonds are formed between the CO of one amino acid and NH of the other amino acid. Okay, in between the CO and NH. And we know in alpha helix on same polypeptide chain, the hydrogen bond is formed between the amino acids of the same polypeptide chain, and in beta pleated, the hydrogen bond is formed between the amino acids of the different polypeptide chains. And hydrophobic bond, we know hydrophobic bond due to hydrophobic nature, some part of the amino acid will try to avoid the water. So when they try to avoid the water, some part of the protein, they forms bond with the other protein. So this is a hydrophobic bond. This bond is known as hydrophobic bond, which is formed by hydrophobic molecules to avoid the water molecules. Van der Waals forces. Okay, these are weak forces which are present, which stabilize the secondary structure. These are due to dipolar moments. And electrostatic bonds. These are weak bonds. We know these are formed between the positive and negative charge of different groups of the amino acids. Coming to the tertiary structure, it denotes three-dimensional structure, and it defines the steric relationship of amino acid which are far apart from each other in the linear sequence. So it denotes arrangement of domains. So domain indicates the compact globular functional unit of the protein. So domain is relatively a little bit independent region of the protein. This is the next higher level of the structure of protein. So domain means it is a part of protein which have its specific function. If protein is divided into different domains, the polypeptide chain is divided into different domains, different parts. Each part will be having its own function. For example, phenylalanine hydroxylase is an enzyme, which is nothing but a protein. So it contains three domains. One part is regulatory domain, and one is catalytic domain, and one is protein-protein interaction domain. So the phenylalanine hydroxylase enzyme, which is nothing but a protein, contains different domains, different parts. Each part is having different function. So one part is having regulatory function, the other part is having catalytic function, and the other part is having protein-protein interaction function. So in this way, domain is nothing but tertiary structure, which will be having different functions. So tertiary structure is also like secondary structure is stabilized by hydrophobic, hydrogen, electrostatic, and van der Waals forces. Coming to quaternary structure, it is aggregate of different polypeptide chains. Okay, up till now we had seen the same polypeptide chain, but this quaternary structure is different polypeptide chains aggregate to form polypeptide chain. So it denotes subunits. So when each polypeptide chains they are dissociated, then it loses its function. Different polypeptide chains are there. When all the polypeptide chains associated, then only it performs its function. When the polypeptide chains are dissociated, individually they can't perform the function. So that is the quaternary structure. So quaternary structure is also stabilized by hydrogen bond, electrostatic and hydrophobic bonds, and van der Waals forces. So depending on the number of polypeptide chains, it is divided into monomer, dimer, and tetramer. And again, homodimer contains two copies of same polypeptide chain, and heterodimer, two different types of polypeptide chains are present. This is a classification. So you have to remember the examples: hemoglobin, which contains two alpha and two beta chains, and immunoglobulin, which contains two heavy and two light chains, and creatine kinase is a dimer which contains two chains, and lactate dehydrogenase is a tetramer which contains four polypeptide chains. So that's why creatine kinase, if you remember the isoenzymes, creatine kinase contains only three isomers. Okay, and lactate dehydrogenase contains 5 isomers because it is having 4 polypeptide chains, whereas creatine kinase is having only 2. And immunoglobulin is having 2 heavy and 2 light, and hemoglobin is also having 2 alpha and 2 beta chains. Coming to the isolation of protein. So for understanding in a better way about the protein, isolation of protein is very important. So for isolation of the protein, this ultracentrifugation, chromatography and electrophoresis are necessary. Okay, ultracentrifugation means depending upon the centrifugal force, the different proteins are divided depending upon the weight of the protein. And chromatography means we know depending upon the weight, depending upon the movement in the chromatographic chamber, these are separated. And in electrophoresis, we know depending upon the movement of a charged particle in an electric field. Depending upon the variation in the movement, we can separate the proteins in electrophoresis also. Coming to the determination of primary structure. So for understanding, we have to, for the primary structure, we have to determine the amino acid composition. We have to determine the number of polypeptide chains, and we have to determine the amino acid sequence for better understanding the primary structure of a protein. So determination of amino acid composition is done by chromatography. So chromatography is technique which is mainly used for separation of amino acids. So by separating amino acids, we can see the composition of the amino acid. And determination of number of polypeptide chains by adding the dancyl chloride. So dancyl chloride will be adding, it will combine with the terminal amino acid, and after that we'll add the HCl and we'll heat it. Then the dancyl chloride will be separated from the amino acid as dancyl amino acid. Okay. So how many dancyl amino acids are there? That many polypeptide chains are there. So in this way we can determine the number of polypeptide chains. So determination of amino acid sequence. The amino acid sequence is determined by adding the Sanger's reagent and Edwards reagent. So Sanger's reagent nothing but 2,4-dinitrofluorobenzene. So when it is added, it is combines with the amino acid. So when again acid is added and it is heated, then this Sanger's reagent will combine with the terminal amino acid to form 2,4-dinitrophenyl derivative. So by this we can see which amino acid is present in the first, and after that we will see the second amino acid, we will see the third amino acid. In this way we can determine the sequence of amino acid by separating on the chromatography. So this is also same thing in Edwards reagent also same. It adds with one of the amino acid, it is separated, and again it combines with another amino acid, it is separated by chromatography. In this way we can know the sequence of amino acids. So we have to see how many polypeptides or chains are present, and we have to see what is the sequence of amino acids for understanding the primary structure. And methods to study higher level of proteins is electron microscope, X-ray crystallography, and nuclear magnetic resonance spectroscopy. So this is the electron microscope, which is a very big equipment, and this is the structure of protein when we see in the electron microscope. And this is X-ray crystallography, and this is nuclear magnetic resonance spectroscopy. So all these are used for understanding the higher versions, higher level of the protein structure. Coming to denaturation, the phenomenon of disorganization of native structure of protein is known as denaturation. So the native structure includes quaternary, tertiary, secondary structures. So when a protein undergoes denaturation, it loses the quaternary, tertiary, and secondary structure, but the primary structure remains intact because the primary structure is stabilized by peptide bonds, which is very strong bond. So that's why the primary structure is intact, but the quaternary, tertiary, and secondary structures will be lost. Okay, that is disorganization of the native structure. Denaturation results in non-specific alternation because there are different bonds in the secondary, tertiary, and quaternary structure. When denaturing agent is added, the protein is exposed to a denaturing agent, then the alterations can occur in any way. It is very non-specific. And when the denaturation occurs, there will be change in the physical, chemical, and biological properties of the proteins because secondary, tertiary, quaternary structures are lost. And cooking leads to denaturation. This is the practical application. So that's why cooked foods are more easily digestible. Because when we cook a food, then denaturation occurs. That means it loses the secondary, tertiary, and quaternary structures, and it will be more exposed because it contains only primary structure. Primary structure is nothing but a linear sequence. So that's why the protein is more exposed for the action of the digestive enzymes. So when it is more exposed, digestive enzymes can easily act and it can be easily degraded or digested. That's why denatured food, that is cooked food, is easily digested. And these are the denaturing agents, the physical and chemical agents, the heat, violent shaking, X-ray, and chemical agents like acids, alkalis, organic solvents. All these are the agents which cause denaturation. So if at all any proteins are exposed to these agents, they undergo denaturation, they lost their properties. So that's why if enzymes are heated beyond 60 degrees, they lost their properties. So that's why if our body is exposed to more heat or exposed to alkalis or acids, different enzymes, different hormones will lose their activity because of denaturation. And denaturation is reversible and irreversible. Immunoglobulins, the example of reversible is immunoglobulins. When urea is added, it gets dissociated, and again when urea is removed, they get associated and they will function normally. That is reversible. And irreversible example is albumin. When the egg is heated, it can't again come back to form albumin. That is irreversible denaturation. Coagulation is a process in which the proteins get denatured and the coagulum is formed. Okay, coagulum means it is nothing but a semi-solid viscous state of the solution. Okay, we had seen in the practicals also. Flocculation is a type of precipitation which occurs at isoelectric pH. And lyophilization is a different procedure. It is known as freeze drying, okay, in which the solid is directly converted to the gas. Any protein, any solid protein is directly converted to the gas, is directly evaporated to the gas without converting to the liquid phase. This is known as lyophilization. This is used for storage of the protein. And again, when the protein is required, again it is converted to the solid. And chromatography, this chromatography is used for separation, isolation of the proteins, mainly for the separation of proteins and separation of amino acids. Electrophoresis is used for separation of proteins, okay, depending upon the charge. This is the pattern formed in the electrophoresis. And coming to the quantitative estimation of proteins, the proteins are quantitatively estimated by different methods: Geldahl procedure, Biret method, Lowry's method, spectrophotometric method, that means estimation, radial immunodiffusion, and nephelometry. So Geldahl method, here the protein is heated and finally the ammonia is formed. When the protein is heated, the condenser is present and ammonia is formed, which is collected, and this ammonia, depending upon the ammonia, we can estimate how much protein is present in the sample. The sample is kept here and it is heated and ammonia is accumulates here, and depending upon the quantity of ammonia, we can estimate the quantity of protein. This is Geldahl method. And Biret method we had already done in the practicals. So Biret method, Biret reagent is added, and depending upon the intensity of the color, the quantitative estimation of protein is done in the Biret. And spectrophotometer, this is just like colorimeter only, but the difference is it can assess the ultraviolet radiation also. But in colorimeter, we will see on the visible radiation. So the spectrophotometric method is also used for estimation of proteins, quantitative estimation. Radioimmunoassay is an antibody-antigen reaction. So the protein antibodies are already added here in the gel, the antibodies are added, then the protein is added as the antigen. So when antigen-antibody reaction takes place, depending upon the quantity of protein, antigen-antibody reaction takes place and the ring is formed, depending on the extent of the antigen-antibody reaction. Okay. If no protein is present in the sample, then no ring is formed. If protein is present, then the ring is formed. So depending upon the diameter of the ring, we'll estimate the amount of protein present in the solution. Okay. Here the proteins act as antigen and the antibody to the protein is already added in the gel sheet. Okay. So this is radioimmunoassay for estimation of quantitative estimation of proteins. Nephelometer. So nephelometer is another method of estimation of proteins quantitatively. And the small remaining topics, protein folding. So when a protein is being synthesized, it may assume different three-dimensional structures, but only one will be having the biological activity. So that one, the abnormal folding of protein is known as protein misfolding. It may lead to different diseases like prion diseases and CJ disease and Scrapple disease. Okay. So these are the different ways of protein folding and misfolding. This protein folding is very important for identification of the biologically important. So the three-dimensional structure here, the biologically important activity is possessed only by some proteins. So that should be sorted out. So that's a protein folding is very important. If that is not sorted properly, it leads to protein misfolding, which leads to different diseases. So these are the different patterns. And chaperones. These are protective proteins for newly synthesized, unfolded or partially folded proteins. So these are actually protective proteins. Okay, they prevent incorrect associations and improper aggregations to prevent protein misfoldings. So that's why chaperones are good. They are protective proteins and they will prevent incorrect associations and improper aggregations to prevent the protein misfolding. So they help in proper folding of proteins, and they are classified into two groups: heat shock proteins. They are also known as HSP and chaperonins. Okay, these are protective proteins. So these are the chaperones, which are protective proteins which help to prevent protein misfolding. So we had seen all the proteins, the properties, the chemical properties, physical properties, classification of proteins, and we had seen the physical properties, chemical properties, classification of amino acids, and we had seen the estimation of the amino acids, estimation of the proteins, quantitative estimation of the proteins, and we had seen the different types of proteins, classification, and we had also seen the structure of proteins, different structural levels of proteins by which we can easily understand the proteins. Okay. Hope everyone understood. Thank you.